Rough Beast is the latest adventure of Bryn Hammond's most excellent sword and sorcery character, Goatskin the Nomad. And it's just one in a set of 4 books you can get through the New Edge Sword and Sorcery Novellas crowdfund. That runs on backerkit.com from September 9th through 30th, where you can get exclusives like a 4x6 postcard of the cover art and pledge for a short story critique by Bryn Hammond herself. For now, why not get a preview by hearing me read the first chapter? Chapter 1. Skins. Winter's scraped hide wore next to the skin, clammy and pongy. She tossed. Vultures had stomach for worse. And White left behind grot with fragrant summer grass. Newly she wrapped her upper torso in a scripture scarf she'd stolen from a temple, silk like the clotted cream she'd eaten in a yak hair tent yesterday. It was meant to blow its scripture on the winds, but the winds had won that contest, and the sun. Only a faint green ink the literate might fail to make out. Duz had no idea, and didn't care. Next, she sawed her knife at the short front of her hair, on a whim twisted the back in its own sweat into 3 tails, stalk-wound. In her spring among the Mongols, she'd seen Chinggis Khan himself in 5 hairtails. What was this binge of self-change? Angaz Dozmat, Goatskin. Duzzy to the woman who'd adventured with her across the Gobi Desert to meet the Mongol Khan. She had begun to go by Duz in the weeks since she rode off from that woman. Now she was footloose again, like her unhobbled horse, another companion from the Gobi journey. No people to bother her, a simple camp. For sleep, a nest of feather grass, warm and alive and tickling her belly, drifting off, listening to tall grasses rustle and a distant drama of nocturnal animals that did not concern her. War blare in a voice she knew, her own horse, even though she hadn't heard that horn from him before. Awake, sprung to her feet, Duz saw him on his hind legs against the starry night sky, battling a shadow. Blades out she ran. The great wolves of these heights were a type unto themselves that didn't flag in air. Duz felt light in her lungs, a float sensation as each foot hit the ground. But the shadow wasn't wolf-shaped, not leopard-shaped either, though it rumble-growled and low-prowled and whipped snake-quick from her horse's hooves and batted for his guts with a big paw. Already in a leap, Duz saw its other front limb, segmented leg, a giant scorpion's claw. Stars shifted in a blur about its body like the nimbus of a saint in queer green. Physical animal or insubstantial spirit? Still unknown when she slammed into it. Shoulder first, and her knife slashed for its belly. She missed. They tussled on the ground too near anxious hooves. He was a fighter, her horse. He hovered to get in a stamp. The figure she embraced wasn't much above her weight, though that left-hand claw was the size of her head, and that right-hand paw swiped and caught her hip to hip. Freed of her, it stood up and boxed with these 2 instruments. Starlight sank confused into its greenish glow, out of which arms jabbed at her in hyper-focus. Duz wove on her feet from a clack of scorpion pincers, one instant uncertain as milk bubbles, the next hard in her face. Her ribs clutched for the rare air. Behind, a dodged punch swung the head up close, with a stinging exhale, jutting bone of cheek and jaw, eyes like rough flesh of black fruit where the pit has been torn out. She'd lost her sword, but stumbled over it again. Fast as she snatched down for it, the leopard paw dug into the socket of her eye. Both hands on the grip, she drove for one of its empty sockets, pierced at jaw level, cut through, clear past the other jowl. Efficiently she rasped her sword in exit of the wound and awaited the result. Her eyes swam, from the puncture of cat's claws or the thinness in her head and lungs, or from the gauzy halo of the beast. Crumpled to the ground, it crawled away, a mule of complaint from its mutilated mouth. At a safe remove, Duz followed, weighed her sword in hand as she thought to chop its neck. Held off, while the beast only tried to reach a sprawl of bramble. A dead monstrosity had less to tell her. It dragged itself on odd limbs of leopard and scorpion, the rest of its body strangely indistinct, until that glow guttered and went out like a wick burnt through its fat, and the figure changed. Human arms in hide gauntlets sewn with a dry severed paw and a small silver scorpion, a common charm. The arms were spindly, and so were naked legs below an apron tied across a skinny spine. Duz crouched and pushed the thing onto its back. It wore a mask, crudely done in mud clay, gouges for eyes, cracked from her blow, blood trickling underneath into the grass. Those non-eyes stared up at her, smeared about with soot or cinders, rough black pits as if two thumbs had squeezed uneven holes and fingernails etched outer lines, simplest strokes that rendered a wild look as of ecstasy. Duz shook herself away from the crazed stare, noticed a shiver in the thin human limbs. Whatever it was, it trembled and bled beneath the mask. Knife prepared, she picked clay shards from around her sword wound, more quickly the larger pieces. It was a girl. Face pierced in several places for the coral jewelry the Yak folk liked, ordinary Chiang features you'd meet in any tribal people west of Fatambet, in Duz's own Chilean mountains. Aged 14 or 15, with frightened eyes, Duz had opened a cheek and thrust out behind the far ear. She had seen people dead from cuts similarly positioned. She had known one to knit up without harm. Had she scraped brain? The question left her queasy. She thought she'd fought a beast, not a girl with a face that might have been her own 10 years ago. Where can I take you? Where's home? Where can I get help? As she asked the girl these things, she grabbed her horse, pulled out her namesake goatskin coat, stowed with her gear for summer, and threw it over those fetish gauntlets, the hide apron stuck with animal ornament and oddments. Wrapped for warmth, Duz lifted her onto the horse, despite his ambivalence as he smelt the beast that had attacked him. You can't talk? Point the way. I'll see you to a hearth of your own folk. At last the girl did point her thin arm, her big glove with the scorpion charm. Duz tugged the fidgety horse in that direction. Perhaps her folk wore animal costumes, werefolk like herself. Even if they did, Duz had dangerously injured this girl by accident, and she wasn't a beast right now. I can't walk away. Occulted by the night, a tent black and low, spidery on its legs of pegged rope. Nothing else in sight but a few humps of yaks couched nearby in the grass, who drowsily ignored them. Don't you have a dog? Muttered Duz. Or are the wolves afraid of your family? The girl tried to talk, but only whimpered. This angered her, and she stabbed her gauntleted hand at the tent. Then she began to climb off Duz's horse. No, I'm not going to drop you and run. I want a look at your folk. Duz didn't know why. She never had a why when weird things drew her. A home mastiff was the usual introduction, and she didn't know how to hail the inhabitants without one. At a distance equivalent to what she'd keep for dogs, she shouted, "Inside the tent!" A moment, and a woman's head thrust through black curtains. I have a girl. She's hurt. She belongs to you? The head shifted its scrutiny to Duz's horse, and the rest of her rushed out between the curtains. No bestial body but a woman disturbed from her summer sleep, nothing on, as naked as was the girl beneath her wearskin apron. Duz stood aside and dragged her stare as she took the girl into her arms and so into the tent. At the flaps, she said briefly behind her, "Come in." Go in? Into the home of a beast girl and a lush woman? The answer was inevitably yes, though Duz gave herself time to choose otherwise as she tied her horse to the hitching rope next to a recumbent yak. She stepped through the woven yak hair to see the woman had thrown on a shawl, and inevitably there was a husband. It seemed an ordinary tent, as flowery on the inside as it was black on the outside, with skilled embroidery, painted wood. No surface left to sit plain. The woman, Egana, woke up her hearth, boiled water, fetched down from the roof slats herbs the husband named. He, Uvet, cared for the girl, Egana's sister. Uvet must be 40, at least 15 years above his wife, but he was quiet in manner, not a type to order her around. I found her in this state a mile off, Duz said, and they didn't question her. Even when Uvet came to her with a ball of tallowy wool and herbs and water, and cleaned the scratch around her eye. That was close to damaging the eye, he told her, hands gentle on her face, and still he did not ask whose claws had caught her. Being summer, The heavy curtains of the tent hung loose to let the air blow through, easy to escape. Duz drank from Aigana's kettle and listened to them talk. For the first time, Yvette used a harsh voice when he said, "Get that travesty off her." He meant the hide apron with its animal pieces, the gauntlets with a leopard paw and a scorpion charm. Aigana did not mind his anger and removed them, shoved them with a violence of her own into a sack in the corner for harness, milk pails, and other livestock gear. "That's not a safe place," said Yvette. "There isn't one," she answered him as shortly. "I won't throw them out. I'm her sister, not her mother. I don't tell her what to do." "Even when she comes home like this?" Yvette laid the backs of his fingers against the girl's brow. He had waved a certain smoke under her nose to send her to sleep. He had staunched the wound with an astringent leaf and bandaged her in lamb's wool. "I hope I won't have to." Aigana stood over him. "This teaches her such things are not a game." "If she recovers," said Yvette very softly. Aigana whirled and stalked over to her fire where Dusmet sat. She was wet-eyed, and in spite of being the guest, Duz poured her a strong brew of tea. After the woman had swallowed her tears along with the tea, Duz spoke up. "I did this, as you suspect. She wasn't a girl when I pulled my sword on her." "We know what she was." "It's my horse she went for. I thought she meant to eat him." "She did." This was Yvette. "They've torn down and eaten out the entrails of people's yaks. They haven't killed a person, but it's only a matter of time. Lucky you didn't meet a group of them. She was out alone?" "As far as I saw." On every side woven hair rustled, black on starlit black. Duz flared her nostrils for wild pelt. Only a night wind nosed in. "Where do they range, these werefolk? I'm on my travels through the Chiang of the Yaks." "We owe you honesty," Aigana said. "Although if word gets out, if officials send memos to Fatimbet that we have an infestation, I fear for us." "My goat Chiang, too, are administrated from Fatimbet. I won't chatter such that townsfolk hear the tales. Whatever a situation, I never knew soldiers or scholar officials to improve a problem for tribal folk. Our were cult is local, and won't bother you when you ride on. It's kids my sister's age, and a few my own. Ungrown-ups, we call them, estranged from the clan, or who haven't settled down. Fatimbet has to do with it. Our kids went to look for trouble in its streets, and they found... I don't know what, but they concocted this beast cult, these costumes they put on, and they change." For Duz, the story was familiar in a way. Hadn't she left home at 14 and gone to hang around the streets of Fatimbet and attracted the wrong kind of attention from its city guard and city god? Out of an obscure guilt, she stayed as Aigana and Yvette kept vigil over the sister. She prowled the outskirts of the tent and sniffed the wind. When night lifted, she ate Aigana's plump lamb seethed in milk and cinnamon. It was sensational, and she took leave to envy Yvette, his wife. With light outside, she slept. The were-cult only changed shape by dark. "Before I ride on, I want to know more about this were-cult out of Fatimbet. That city has been a worse haunt to me than spirit beasts or young folk who flirt with them. Can you tell me how to meet others who wear the skins?" Aigana's great eyes went to where a flap had been thrown up on the roof, letting in the afternoon sun. "You slept through most of Fair Day, but I hear the tail end. It's our high summer festival. Every day is a fair day, and each night the cultists celebrate too. Over the meadows, music, disjointed in drifts of wind, miles of craggy stone and swaths of grass, but a blot to Duz, the glint of temple tiles. The same intruded in her Chilean mountains, the universal temple. Tanguts Utsus in Halachar ruled as saint kings and sponsored the temples of the wise, or the other way around. Temples built in brick among the animal hair homes of nomads to convert folk from their uncivilized spiritual practices, edifices to edify. They had tried to send Duz to school in one. "A temple fair?" "Yes, and I'm afraid you can't go in a scripture scarf for a vest. Yvette and I aren't fussy about sacrilege, but if I'm to escort you to the fair, I think a change of outfit." That must be the temple she purloined her silk wrap from a day ago at dusk. "I only have my coat, else, and it needs a scrub." She kept Aigana's injured sister warm in her goatskin coat, and it was bloody. Blood being a pollution, she'd hung it out behind the tent. "I can fix that." Duz thought she meant to scrub her goatskin straight away, but instead she came back with a waistcoat. a sample of fine embroidery like the rugs and cushions Duz had slept on, Aigana's work. Aigana's hands helped her into the waistcoat and fastened toggles across the sacrilegious scarf that wrapped her chest. Those plump hands smote Duz as startlingly as used to happen when she was young. A stranger's beauty like a lightning strike, a spell of fascination. Young Anga's Duz mistook earthly women for goddesses based on one flash of unconcealed glamour in a random portion of the body. Not so young Duz had turned her eyes from Aigana naked, but failed to look away from the hands. Is this an effect of splitting up? I revert to 6 years ago, before her, as if I've earned no experience? It was inconvenient, and she'd managed to ask, Is this Yvette's? Oh, other men have worn it. It's mine, said Aigana. I lend it out. She spoke these words with a significance, and Duz wasn't stupid. She began to suspect the state of affairs. Strictly on the waistcoat, though. It was festival wear, lavishly sewn from yak hair yarn, steeped in a dozen pigments. It sat nicely on Duz, who had always been called laddish in shape, while Aigana, now weighing herself down with coral jewelry, was the Qiang womanly ideal in size, as plump as a milk-fed marmot in a common line. Qiang peoples, sensibly in the climate, prized fat, and Duz, half-starved half the time, didn't have enough. Summers might be brief in the altitudes of nomads, and busy too, but that was no disincentive to celebration. Aigana left Yvette at her injured sister's side and walked with Duz through meadows to the fair. A trait of Duz's ex, in the early adventurous days, was a wild indifference, a selfish irresponsibility, an insistence on enjoyment, even at others' expense. Duz had missed that in her when their last escapade turned serious. They were late to the fair, but there was still a dance circle, and there were still fried sweets hot in pans. Aigana joined feverish dancers who refused to lie down. Duz scoured for sweets. She saw a cart leaping contest, ambitious in the elevation of milk brandy, and her goat legs yearned. They let her insert her talents. Rowdy young men didn't flip hostile when she tied with last year's champion, a ridiculously tall local. Old herders sat with old llamas in the shade of the temple wall, critical eyes on the young. A voice intruded in her mind. Ignore the old as much as they let you. An extremely old shaman had said this to her. Light waned on the dregs of the fair. In twos and threes young folk dribbled away, after each other, a knot of girls from the circle dance, the tall cart leaper, and a couple of drunken comrades. A hand jogged Duz's elbow. Aigana's englamoured hand. There they go, off to their overnight ceremony. They went with a haughty lack of concealment. They weren't ashamed, although seniors pointed at them from the temple wall in evident disgust. Near Duz, a 30-year-old llama in the back half of a demon suit for a temple play, who had been grinning with lay friends, scowled and muttered about devil worship. But the temple believed every spirit from the Black Faith, as they named old Qiang practices that never had a name, was a devil. Bad temper settled like an ugly squall over the fairgrounds. Mothers dragged hysterical children, elders stomped and threatened family members with staves. Outside the low-slung black tents, fairgoers burnt sagebrush and clanged pots to drive off bad influences before they entered the home. The temple shut its gates, fluttering with wild tales of scripture scarfs, and from behind them sent up a chant that the wind whipped into thin shrieks. Duz pushed into Aigana's hand a shard of nacre from the distant sea, her prize for clearing a hurdle of 5 carts. I don't have a sister. It's for you. To the young men she had competed with, ornaments were a coin to court girls. Aigana's weather-reddened cheeks flared in the sunset. You never wear jewelry? Never. Awkward, Duz gestured where the cultists had vanished, up a rocky height. I'm going to watch. Let me come, I know this ceremony, and you're a stranger. She tugged Duz by the fingers, which smoked away objection. Upslope, a stone ring cut off visibility. Unseen from beneath, and once inside the ring, you saw only sky and horizons. In this rough circle, the temple, and the tents pitched together for joint summer tasks, might not exist. Cultists took off ordinary clothes and put on hide aprons, dangling strips of pelt or clumps of hair, signed in chalk or charcoal or in stitches, hung with trinkets. How do they like intruders? Asked Duz, crouched on flaky stone between in and out. The worse if you try to spy on them. Open curiosity isn't hostile. And Aigana chose a grassy seat with her back against the stone rim. Sit. Don't lurk, she told Duz. Like wolves around a feast, the cultists inspected them with one eye or lazy glances, and didn't bother to act. Like wolves, they might inscrutably, collectively, change their minds. Against her instincts, Duz sat beside Aigana, who wore no blade beyond a utility knife. This is where we hold Ominan, Aigana said, in the old days. Ominan. The name chimed like the bell on a goat you'd given up for lost, your sacred goat who had abandoned you. You thought, but now came home. Duz hadn't thought about Ominan in years. Aigana went on. But Ominan was banned when most of these were children. Nobody trespassed up here except our strays, until the kids who had been to Fatumbet decided they were too sophisticated to fear old shaman's grounds. Fear was the charm in Ominan, Duz half laughed, at least in a child's eye view. Elder-led clan worship was dull because it was safe. I didn't even miss it, to my shame, when old ways were ousted by the temple, since feasts went on. But the temple had nothing to substitute for our excitement at Ominan. Devil plays didn't throw a scare into us, like the shaman and his spirits. Did your people have the same Ominan spirits as ours? Did you have Jayachi and Uncle Bear? We called him Joel Jayachi, and he inhabited a felt hanging sewn with wild animals' fur, shaggy and stinky with the fat we gave him, but otherwise only a shaman touched him, and hung him up in chief place at the festival of every spirit. We had him, and Uncle Bear, who lived in a ferocious copper face only the shaman put on once a year at Ominan. I remember an Abagaldi. I think that's him. Who was he for your folk? Oh, he was terrible in life, a drunken layabout who deserted his wife and children, who only shifted himself when he got into brawls. One night, gorged on liquor, he was lightning struck, and by accident his spirit met a grumpy bears his clan had killed, and they found common grievance became a pest together. Or maybe Uncle had been a bear the whole time. The tale's equivocal on that point. We have rumors of bears who kidnap women, too, or women who run off with them. Aigana smiled archly. Our grandfathers pick him out when they scoff about the past. They can't stand Uncle Bear, but he was a spirit mostly kept by woman shamans, and I have heard grandmothers more lenient towards him, and less harsh on the bear tales. She laughed. Men don't want to acknowledge such a bad clan member, but women are familiar. Over Aigana's vivacious face Duz spared an eye for the cultists, not yet in a concerted activity, but casual, chatting, skylarking like any group of young folk, if not for the whimsical costumes, the animal scraps, and crude clay masks. They did not light a fire. Stars were thrown spectacularly close up here. No moon was out. Until a glow slid through chinks in stone on the far side of the ring, behind cultists who turned to the encounter in a stance with lifted arms, pale flares licking at them like disastrous meteors, and slowly the moon loomed above the rim. As spooky a moon as Duz had seen, with as near a thing to a face, a blistered, cracked, eroded face, bleary eyes and heavy pouches, an old person's slobbery pout. A monstrous moon. It seemed their signal. Down at the fair, the young had favored city liquor mash you buy cheap in the wine shops, even though summer was the time for fermented milk in frothy vats, sweet and astringent, a sting and a tang on the tongue. Duz had indulged to bloat on bubbly milk. Now the stick insect Duz had leapt carts against dragged out a night-black yak calf and quickly slit its throat. They caught its blood in a leather pail, and then they poured in milk others freshly squeezed from the dead calf's mother's teats, a clump of them around her to hide what they had done. But she smelt the blood, and was suspicious, and she struggled free. They flung the carcass down slope, and she bellowed, her whitened eyes on that limp arc, and the yak cow blundered away after her child. Raw milk and fresh blood swirled together in a pail, and the stick insect first dipped a ladle and swallowed. Others followed him. One by one the cultists crouched and partook of this filthy drink. Duz almost heaved up her belly of fermented milk. The smell alone made her queasy, and the smell took her back to Ominan, though the last shaman ceremony she witnessed must be 15 years ago. Raw milk, fresh blood, was the concoction the community gave its shaman, because it was spirit's food, an anti-food a human stomach turned to think of. At Amanan, people fed the shaman laughing, for he was not quite human. He was one, too, with the spirits. He belonged on both levels of existence. People prepared a pail for him with exaggerated displays of disgust and teased him with the treat, for in his trance he was the victim of a more than human hunger, a crazed desire for this strange sustenance, and when they let him at it, he lapped and splashed, his head right in the pail, the picture of a wolf deranged with thirst. Nobody drinks an animal's milk from the teat, and blood you put in sausages or soup. People cook. Aigana pressed upon her a flask of strong milk alcohol distilled to clarity. It cut the coat of that stench upon her tongue. It settled her stomach, and it felt like safety, too. It set them apart from the cult, watchers, not participants. The two of them didn't call down spirits with a shaman's drink. Duz chugged distilled milk before she gave the flask back to Aigana, wiped her mouth, and spoke distinctly, although low. That lad with the legs isn't a shaman. None of them pretend to be shamans. They laugh at shamans. This is far from a revival of old ways. I listened to his banter with his friends. He has more shank than sense. You say this isn't a revival, yet they come here, where you held Amanan? It's 9 years since our last. Only 9 for you. 9 years is nothing to spirits who used to gather here for food and consent the old dish. Wafts of the revolting preparation still assailed her. Where spirits have a memory of Amanan, that smell must attract them the way salty human urine sets reindeer in a rush at you when you squat for a piss. Or how women's monthly blood attracts a bear. And there is nobody to deal with them. The roughest spirits eat out of a great shaman's hand, but Avagaldi would have this lot for tiffin. Without a shaman we trusted at Amanan, there wouldn't have been much laughter. Duz pulled herself up, chewed over her words with a mouth whose skin still tingled from milk alcohol. To grumble against the young was certain sign you were on the road to age into a fuddy-duddy. To sit in the line of elders under the temple wall, lamas and herders in sour unison as they watched these youths at festival. Worst of fates, to be the crotchety grandfathers shepherding families home with a stick. I was young, wasn't I? Maybe I still am? Did I tell you? She swerved off that road. I too went to Fattembed at 14. I was a delinquent in its streets. Once you have that label, delinquent, they say you look for trouble, but nobody looks for other than trouble from you. Aigana gave her the flask again. I never was in Fattembed, or any town bigger than my thumb. What did you do in your delinquency? They might as well chat. The cultists weren't doing a lot else. That shaman's potion seemed to be a fizzler, since none of them were shamans. They didn't enter trance to talk to spirits, although lads Duz had leapt against jumped about in drunken random resemblance of a shaman's trance feats. Girls Aigana had danced with persisted in their overtired near-trance state of motion to a music of flutes and waist drums. While this nothing much was going on, Duz told tales of her misspent youth, before her misspent majority. Until I upset Fattembet city god, Tsopji, once victorious general of the Westwards campaign that captured Chiang peoples, our ancestors, into Tangut's government, now guardian of the city that has us spiderwebbed in paperwork. The god took umbrage with my simple acts of graffiti and defacement, me, an insolent Chiang goat herd still in her skins. It was worse when the lowest kind of actress troops turned my antics into skits. The gods feud with me fodder for common people's laughter, in the streets and at rest stops on the road. I caught 1 or 2 of them. Tsopji, a clown on stilts in a big tinsel helmet, walloping around him an enormous inflatable club. Me, played by an acrobat who led him on a wild goose chase and thumbed her nose, or ruder gestures. What a come-down for a god. What indignity for a conquest general. Duz swigged milk liquor and reminisced on this moment of her fame among the greater non-tribal population of western Tangut. A girl cultist swung by close, oblivious to them, arms stretched skywards and head lolled back on her shoulders, as if her dance mate were the moon. Hey! Duz leaned after her as the girl twirled away. See her hair in flames? Felt triangles finger-painted in red and orange and yellow, wrapped like a lively effulgent crown. She's a fire starter. It's a stock character in puppetry. In Fatimbet? Yes, in Fatimbet. I've seen a dozen puppets with hair like that and the pottery faces that look like her mask. Stark, ecstatic lines etched around wide-open eyes, pursed lips as if about to burst into a wild trill. Fire starters are a semi-institution in the city, women who hire out to fire people's houses in a feud. They have skill not to beg in a conflagration, but city people dread them. They work in the dead of night and dodge the watch, rarely identified, but rumor is they include respectable women. In the plays, at least, husbands discover wives at this nighttime activity and are appalled. Strange how feud works in a city. Why is it women? I have no idea, but the city is doubly a jail for women. Respectability requires one not to walk out in public. I'd escape at nights too. Once she had the hint, Duz scrutinized other costumes for resemblances to puppetry and found them. The common element in puppets was wild, wide eyes, flung up arms, a gesture, and glazed look of ecstasy. There was a crazed joy to them, to their high-spirited plays, their grimaces next thing to frantic grins, however dark the plots. For puppetry got away with horrific subjects, a level of violence that if done by human actors would run athwart the censors. In Fatimbet, puppet theatres set up on street corners or near shops fascinated children, but weren't for children only. Everybody stood a moment or an hour at a puppet play. Duz spotted odd pieces of the stock types in these cultists' idiosyncratic costumes. A general celebration of the exaggerated and grotesque, but also that basic similarity of look, like an innocence. All at once, that collapsed-in face of the senescent moon dropped below the stone circle and was seen no more. Instead, stars. In the moon's sudden absence, stars clustered thickly like yellow jackals slunk out of the dark to drink around a pond. Duz felt her hackles rise, as if she had been washing at the pond and saw their lustrous eyes. She had a terrible sense of presence. As a child, Amanan had been a state of constant near panic held in suspense, the knowledge of safety in the shaman. You stared the worst of spirits in the eye. At the festival of every spirit, the shaman names them all, lulls them for another year, no less a hero than one who walks in the flesh through monsters, except he stroked them, he didn't slay them. Maybe this was Amanan still to the spirits who don't forget, who lurk and strike, half-known, understood only in the songs a shaman learns to sing to them. Up on such a height, constellations tangled in blazes right above your head, single stars hung close enough to pluck. Underneath this imminent night sky, the cultists began to bleed themselves. They cut into their inner arms with knives and bled onto their costumes. Duz watched them let their own blood and remembered thin white scars on Igana's sister's arm. This second blood play of the cult disturbed her as much as the first, for in the blood resides the soul that belongs to you alone. 3 souls sustain a person, but one is bone from the ancestors, and one is of the flesh. These recycle. Whereas when blood is lost yourself, your individuality leaks out on that vivid fluid of life. Nobody of the tribes liked to witness their own soul loss, soul leakage. Chiang had strong feelings about the sight of blood. In a ghastly distant past, Duz had been a cutter, merely out of fascination, a game with possession of the self. She had a tight grip on herself these days, although since she left Kimau and changed her hair and chopped short her name, she felt encroached on. She felt she was fighting an uncertainty. Exposure of your blood under the eyes of a flock of spirits was to throw scraps to jackals at the outer of your camp. They'd come on in a rush. Igana pulled her arm. The rest isn't for us. They enliven their costumes with blood and they change. Let's go home. No argument from me. Duz wasn't inquisitive enough to see what shapes they changed into, not with a single sword and Igana at her side. Scrambling over the rim of stone, they went hand in hand downhill. Briskly they walked through remnants of the temple fair, empty awnings, pretty butter lamps of brass uncollected, ill-tied ribbons blown around their feet. Summer nights, when tents pitched as neighbors in the richest meadows, were a rare opportunity to natter with acquaintance, to court, but black curtains were dropped and staked down from the inside, and felt muffled, even the wail of children. A scent of wild animal curled into Duz's nostrils, and in the corner of her eye a shape slid lithe and low. 5 yaks outside a tent pressed their rumps together and lowered their heavy heads. Shadows prowled, glimpses behind them, and ahead an escort of were-creatures as they walked between the rope-legged spidery black tents. Duz tightened on Igana's hand and only slowed her stride, soared out and circling to catch in turn the glint of stars. Over the last unpeopled stretch, Igana's tent set apart from others, the werebeasts teased at a distance too far to distinguish them for certain. Duz knew them by the creep of her skin. At last, Igana lifted a black curtain onto firelight. Nothing cheers the marrow of a human like firelight when she is stalked in the dark. Inside, she shook off the bristle of her scalp and nape and spine. And you have no shaman, even one who works in subterfuge beneath the temple's notice? Out of sight of your elders, if they are temple now? Igana didn't answer, but fixed her eyes on Yvette, still at his station beside her injured sister. Yvette considered, and arose. No, he said. I'm the nephew of the last, and too near a shaman for most of them as a healer. Enough to have them suspicious of me, although I never tranced in my life. Your uncle or aunt is dead? Assumed dead. He came over to the hearth and the three of them sat. You guessed right about our elders. Clan seniors abandoned the old observances for lama ranks and pensions from the temple. My uncle uttered no renouncement, but was forced to cease practice. From then on, what had been a healthy divergence of views, my uncle's side of things as a shaman, and the grandfathers and grandmothers who led clan ceremony at mountains and rivers, those two ways that were always at odds, once traditional life was lost, became an enmity. The temple simplified our beliefs, and the shaman's vision was the source of evil, while the dignified worship of elders had the right instincts. My uncle declined and lived his latter years as the butt of the community. You might hear of him. He was a sad old drunk. But our clan heads were the first to laugh at him, and they taught the children to ridicule the shaman and his silly habits. Duz listened to Yvette with a new respect. What happened to him? You said assumed dead. Yvette sank his gaze into the fire, suffused with grief, as soft to wear as aged leather. He had fine eyes in his 40-year-old face, yet his speech roughened. Bilget was a husk of the shaman he had been, but 11 months ago he dug up his illegal instruments again and set off on a quest, his talk of a combat both impossible and insane. What combat? There's a mountain where our grandfathers used to worship an ancestor spirit, Jiko Galai. The Tangut government has opened a mine. To extract a unique mineral deep in the mountain, they built on site a great contraption. Settlers in from towns to work the mine have rumors of a beast down in the pits, and people here can't help but think of Jilo Galai, our abandoned ancestor who inhabited the mountain. Even though a shaman doesn't worship by ancestor or lineage, our clan seniors don't care. They rest content in their bribes, and my uncle took into his head to go and battle the engineer's contraption that disturbs the spirit in the mountain. A mad idea, since a machine isn't a spirit or an animal. He can't grapple in mental fight with a machine. It has no mind. But I suppose my uncle can be called ignorant of either the machinery of engineers or of the Tangut government. I tried to talk sense into him, but he evaded me and was gone, and that's the last I saw or heard of him, almost a year ago. A poignancy about this story smote Duz in the dimly known innards, a symbol, in a way, of the encroachment of Tangut state on tribal peoples. The shaman's last battle, gallant, courageous, even if his wits were turned. I've nowhere else to be, Duz thought. I came to look at the Yak Chiang. I can investigate his fate. Where lies this mountain? Thank you for listening to the first chapter of What Rough Beast by Bryn Hammond. The crowdfund for this and 3 other novellas launches at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesday, September 9th. You can find it by following the link in the description for this video or going to BackerKit and searching for New Edge Sword and Sorcery novellas. I promise you, it's the only one. If you're hearing this video before the crowdfund launches, I would still recommend looking it up because you can learn some more details in the sign-up page and sign up to be alerted the moment the crowdfund launches. If you're hearing this after it ends at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, September 30th, if you're hearing this later, I would say go to brackenburybooks.com and you should be able to find where you can pre-order the book or just order it, depending on how far in the future you're hearing my words. Thanks for listening, and do keep an eye out for first chapter readings from the other 3 books in the crowdfund.